There are a lot of Halo games that I boot up when I want to feel powerful, but Halo Reach isn't one of them. I mean, sure, you play as a Spartan still, but Reach is the Halo I load when I want to remember where I was, who I was playing with, and why I stayed up way too late on a night I should have been in bed. Because you see, to me, Reach doesn't feel like a challenge that you beat. It feels like a save file that you're revisiting. Because you already know what's coming. You already know how it ends. And yet, you hit start anyways. Hey, and welcome back to another mainline Monday edition of the Average Joe Nerdcast. I'm Nate, your nostalgia archaeologist, lifelong Halo fan, and a man who still believes split-screen co-op should be legally protected. And today we're talking Bungie's final Halo, the prequel, a war story where the ending is baked in from the very beginning. This is not a victory lap episode. It's not about finishing the fight. It's about why Bungie chose loss, why Reach landed the way it did in 2010, and why, all these years later, it still sits with so many of us. We're going to talk the numbers. We're going to talk behind the scenes. We're going to talk campaign, multiplayer, Forge Chaos, all of it. So let's go back to the moment Reach arrived and why it absolutely mattered. To really understand Halo Reach, you've got to drop yourself back into 2010, not 2007 Halo 3 chaos. This is a different gaming world. The Xbox 360 is still dominant, sure, but shooters are everywhere now. Call of Duty is no longer on the rise. It is the mainstream. Modern Warfare 2 just rewired what people expect from multiplayer pacing, progression, and spectacle. And Halo is no longer the scrappy revolutionary. Halo is the standard bearer, which is a much harder place to stand. By 2010, Halo has history, expectations, and a whole lot of baggage. So when Bungie announces Halo Reach, it's already an unusual move. Not a sequel, not Halo 4, but a prequel. And not just any prequel, the Papa prequel, The Fall of Reach. The event every Halo fan knows about but has never actually played through. And that alone should have been a warning sign, because prequels don't sell power fantasies usually. They sell inevitability. And yet, Halo Reach was massive. Microsoft reported that Halo Reach pulled in $200 million in its first 24 hours. That's not successful for a video game. That's blockbuster movie numbers. Before the weekend even hits. In North America alone, Halo Reach moved over 3.3 million copies in just its first month, making it one of the best-selling video games of 2010. And the thing is, this wasn't nostalgia-driven hype. Halo Reach had already proven itself months earlier, because you didn't just sign up for the Reach beta. You had to go through Halo 3 ODST. That beta ran in May of 2010, and it brought in over 2.7 million players, with more than 1 million jumping in on day one. That's not curiosity. That's trust. That's people saying, all right, Bungie, show us what you've been working on. And real quick sidebar for the younger audience. Back then, betas weren't just links that you clicked on or downloaded. You had to earn your access. Buying ODST wasn't just buying a game. It was buying you your seat at the table. And when Reach's beta went live, it felt like a reunion tour. Old gamer tags popping back up online, friends lists lighting up again. And not because Reach was flashy, but because it felt important. And what makes this moment fascinating is the contrast. Because Reach wasn't marketed like Halo 3. There were no epic finish the fight chants, no victory framing. Even early previews leaned quiet, somber. Bungie wasn't promising domination. They were just promising a story. And that was kind of a risk. Because 2010 shooters were leaning faster, louder, bigger, more perks, more spectacle. Reach goes the opposite direction. It kind of slows things down. It introduces friction, and it leans into atmosphere. And that should tell you something important. Bungie wasn't trying to chase the market. They were trying to say goodbye on their own terms. And this is where Reach's numbers matter. Because Halo Reach proves something rare. You can make a game about loss and still have the world show up for it. People didn't buy Halo Reach because they expected to win. They bought Halo Reach because Bungie had earned their trust over a decade. And that trust bought Bungie permission. Permission to make a war story where the heroes fall. Permission to end their Halo run not with fireworks, but with ash drifting through a glassed world. Which brings us to the most important question of the episode. Why did Bungie choose this story? Why a doomed prequel? Why a player-created protagonist? Why a squad instead of a legend? And to answer that, we've got to leave the sales charts behind and step inside Bungie itself. Because Reach isn't just a Halo game. It's a studio speaking directly to its fans. And once you see what was happening behind the scenes, Reach stops feeling mysterious and it starts feeling completely intentional. So here's the part of Reach you don't fully understand until you kind of zoom out. Reach isn't just a prequel. It's Bungie choosing how to leave. You see, by the time Reach enters full production, Bungie already knows something the audience mostly doesn't unless they're in the know. This is going to be their last Halo. They're finishing their contract. They're preparing to step away from Microsoft. And they're staring down a question most studios never get to answer on their own terms. How do you end the thing that made you? And Bungie's answer wasn't go bigger. It was go quieter. The easy and most logical move probably would have been Halo 4. New threat, higher stakes, another cliffhanger. Instead, Bungie chooses to go backwards. They pick a story where the outcome is already written. A planet you know is doomed. A battle you know humanity loses. And that's not an accident. That's Bungie deliberately stripping themselves of the ability to escalate. Because Reach isn't about saving the galaxy. It's about doing your job anyway. And that philosophy, it shows up everywhere. So let's start with the biggest one. Why Noble 6 is customizable. After the Master Chief, this was a choice. The Chief is iconic. He's mythic. He's singular. So why follow him up with a almost silent, truly customizable Spartan that you barely know? And the answer is because Noble 6 is not meant to be remembered as a legend. They're meant to be remembered as a role, a helmet, a call sign, a slot someone could step into and never step out of. Reach isn't asking you to become Noble 6. It's asking you to fill the gap that they leave behind. That's why you choose the armor. That's why you choose the voice. And it's why Noble 6 does not get a speech. They get orders. Then there's Noble Team as a whole. This is another big departure from the previous Halo games. Halo usually isolates you. Chief is alone even when he's surrounded by Marines. Reach puts you in a squad, and not a superhero squad, a military one. Carter's the commander, Kat's the planner, June's the sniper, Emil's the gung-ho trigger-happy badass, and George is the heart. And you? You are the spare, the extra gun, the one who can be sent anywhere and left anywhere. And that's not accidental either, because Reach isn't about a chosen one. It's about the machine. So let's talk technology, because this is where Bungie quietly levels up. Reach runs on an evolved version of the Halo 3 engine, but it's doing way more than Halo 3 ever even attempted. Bigger play spaces, longer sight lines, heavier use of fog, smoke, and weather. There's more animation blending. The characters move with more weight, not snap. Reach looks hazier on purpose. It's not a clean war. It's obscured, messy, unreadable. Bungie wanted battlefields where you don't always know what's coming next, which feeds directly into the next big design shift. The armor abilities. This is where Reach really breaks from tradition. Halo 3's equipment was situational. Pick it up, use it once, it's gone. Reach, on the other hand, says, no, you can carry your choices with you. Sprint, jetpack, armor lock, active camo, hologram, evade, drop shield. These aren't necessarily power-ups. They're doctrinal differences. They change how you approach every firefight. And here's the key thing Bungie understood. Even if players argued about it for years, and trust me, we have, armor abilities slow the combat down. They introduce hesitation, second guessing, and commitment. And in a war story about attrition, that's the entire point. Reach doesn't want you flowing effortlessly from kill to kill. It wants you pausing, repositioning, backing out of firefights, because that's what losing wars look like. And here's something people kind of forget. Bungie already knew this was going to be divisive. They weren't blind to the reaction, but by this point, Bungie wasn't designing Halo to last forever. They were designing Halo to say something. Which brings me to another intentional decision. No more dual wielding. That mechanic had been a Halo staple since Halo 2. It's flashy, it's fun, it's 100% empowering, and Reach removes it. Why? Because dual wielding is all about excess, and Reach is about scarcity. Weapons feel heavier, reloads feel longer. At its core, you are encouraged to commit to a role, not a loadout fantasy. And that's Reach in a nutshell. And here's the thing that ties all of this together. Reach was built differently organizationally too. After Halo 2 nearly collapsed under the crunch, Bungie restructured development. Campaign and multiplayer were built in parallel but separated, so one did not destroy the other. Testing pipelines were tighter. Internal playtesting was absolutely constant. Reach was not chaos. It was discipline, and that discipline, it shows in the final product. Because even when you disagree with Reach's choices, you cannot argue they were not intentional. And that's why all of Reach kind of feels sad. Because you see, Reach isn't Bungie trying to top themselves. It's Bungie taking responsibility for the story that they told. And once you understand that, the campaign stops feeling like a sequence of missions, and it starts feeling like a countdown. So now that we know why Bungie made Reach the way they did, how about we walk through how that philosophy actually plays out on the ground? Because Reach never tells you you're losing. It teaches you, one mission at a time. Now, Reach doesn't start with spectacle. It starts with almost an unease. And that is important. Because Bungie could have opened this game with glassing beams and exploding cities, but they chose not to. They start you with quiet. You land on Reach, and at first it doesn't feel like a Halo game. There's no heroic music, no massive set pieces just yet, just rural farmland, dead communications, and something feeling off. You're not fighting an invasion just yet. You're investigating a problem. And that's the first trick Reach pulls. It lets you believe just for a moment that this might just be contained. Then, the Covenant shows up, and the tone shifts immediately. Because Reach doesn't introduce the enemy like a boss fight. It introduces them almost like a disease, something that's already spread farther than anyone wants to admit. And then you get to Sword Base. This is where Reach reveals what kind of war it's going to be. Sword Base isn't about heroics. It's about control, Oni, the black sites, and containment. Cat's confidence is absolute here. The plan is airtight, and the math works until it doesn't. Because Reach isn't interested in plans that succeed. It's interested in showing you how quickly certainty will collapse. Sword Base falls not because you play badly, but because the war is already much, much bigger than the tools you've brought. Then comes Nightfall, and this is the first real tonal pivot. There's no big squads, no chatter. Just you, June, and a darkened landscape that feels hostile even when nothing's shooting at you. Nightfall is Reach saying, pay attention. This is not going to be loud all the time. It's a mission built around anticipation. And that absolutely matters because Reach isn't just about loss. It's about waiting for it. That slow, creeping dread. And then Tip of the Spear, the False Hope mission. Big open battlefield, tanks and warthogs rolling, falcons in the air. And for a brief window, Reach lets you feel like the UNSC can push the Covenant back. And that's intentional, because Tip of the Spear is the high watermark. The last time Reach let you believe momentum is possible. And then, the Long Night of Solace. This is where Reach changes permanently. Space combat, sabers, zero gravity. It's absolutely exhilarating, don't get me wrong, until it isn't. George's sacrifice is not cinematic in the way Halo deaths usually are. There's no lingering speech, no swelling choir, just a realization that the thing you just destroyed wasn't the real threat. It was just the door. And when the Covenant Armada arrives, the war is absolutely lost. It just hasn't told the ground forces yet. And then Exodus and New Alexandria. These missions don't ask you to win. They ask you to get civilians out. Falcon hops, emergency landing, civilian evacuations under direct fire. And this is where Reach feels the most human. You're not changing the course of the war. You're reducing casualties. You're buying precious minutes. And the city around you is dying in real time. The buildings burn, smoke thickens, the sky turns hostile. Reach is not subtle here, but it is honest. This is what collapse looks like. And then, the Pillar of Autumn. And by now, Noble Team is already fractured. The mission is surgical, precise, almost procedural. Deliver the package, secure the ship, hand off the future. And that's when it clicks. You are not the hero of this story. You're the handoff. Your job is to make sure Halo Combat Evolved can happen. That's it. Everything you've done funnels into that one outcome. And when the autumn lifts off, Reach doesn't celebrate. It just moves on. And then, Lone Wolf. And this isn't a mission. It's a statement. One objective. No allies. No victory conditions. Just survival. The game doesn't ask how well you play. It asks how long you'll stand. And when Noble 6 finally falls, the camera doesn't linger on you. It pulls away, like the world already has. And here's why Reach's campaign works where others might have failed. Bungie never lies to you. They don't pretend your actions will save the planet. They don't offer a miracle at the end. They just tell you the truth, early and often, and then ask you to participate anyways. And here's the thing, for me, Reach wasn't just about watching Noble Team fall. It was about proving something to myself inside that system. Because Reach didn't just give us a story about endurance. It challenged us to endure too. Which is why some of my proudest gaming moments of all time happen in Reach. Because the game is full of moments where it looks at you and says, Okay, you think you're hot shit? Prove it. And not in a scoreboard kind of way, and not in a flex on your friends way, although I absolutely do flex on my friends with these achievements. Because it's a personal way. Because Reach doesn't hand you pride for free. So let's start with If They Came to Hear Me Beg. And nah, this one isn't about grinding a firefight wave or getting lucky in a big shootout. This is Reach asking you to do something that feels like a myth. You have to assassinate an elite mid-fall during a drop that would have killed you if you whiff it. So it's not just skill, it's nerve and it's timing. It's that split-second decision where your brain goes, this is either going to be the coolest fucking thing I've ever done in Halo, or I'm about to ragdoll into the dirt like an idiot. And when you actually land it, when the animation hits and the achievement pops, that's not a nice, got it kind of moment. That's a holy hell moment. Reach doesn't give you a win often, so when it does, it makes sure you feel it. And that is one of my proudest moments. I'm pretty sure it took me at least 100 tries just to nail that achievement. And it was so fucking worth it. Then there's A Monument to All Your Sins. Solo legendary. All missions. No safety net. And this one isn't about reflexes and it's not about endurance. It's about learning enemy behavior, about respecting every encounter, about knowing when to push and when to back off. And Reach on Legendary is absolutely ruthless. Enemies do not miss. Resources are scarce, and mistakes compound fast. There's no power curve that saves you. You either adapt or you don't. And when I finished that run, I didn't feel like I conquered Reach. I felt like Reach had allowed me to pass. Like the game saying, all right, you paid attention. Good job, buddy. And that's what makes these moments special to me. They weren't flashy. They didn't come with fireworks. They felt earned in the purest sense. Reach doesn't reward dominance. It rewards discipline. And through all of it, here's the bigger point. These achievements don't exist outside Reach's story. They reinforce it. They mirror the campaign's thesis. Stand your ground, endure the pressure, do the job even when the odds are stacked against you. And Reach never tells you you're special. It lets you prove it quietly. And maybe that's why this episode feels a little heavier than the other Halo dives. Because Reach isn't about nostalgia fireworks. It's about looking back and realizing, yeah, that kind of changed me a little. Not just as a player, but as a person who learned patience, who learned to finish something hard, who learned that sometimes pride doesn't come from winning. It just comes from not quitting. And after all that intensity, Reach does something incredibly smart. It gives you space to breathe. Because once you step out of the campaign and into multiplayer, the tone shifts, not away from Reach's identity, but into how players responded to it. And this is where Reach becomes controversial and really, really interesting. You see, multiplayer asks what you do when everyone brings their own version of survival into the same room. And for the first time in Halo's life, not everyone agreed on what that should look like. So let's start with the mode that most clearly tells you what Reach wanted to be. Invasion. It's Reach's soul in multiplayer form. Not symmetrical, not fair in the traditional sense. Deliberately uneven. Spartans versus elites. 3 phases. Escalating power. You don't start with everything. You have to earn it. And what I love about Invasion is that it feels like a campaign mission stretched across 12 real people. Early phases are scrappy, limited kits, tight objectives. Then the sandbox opens up, vehicles, better weapons, momentum shifts. It's not about kill counts, it's all about pressure. Hold the line long enough to unlock the next tool. Break through defenses before time runs out. Invasion does not pretend to be competitive purity. It wants to feel like a war. And thematically, it fits Reach's identity perfectly. Then there's the arena, the ranked playlists. This is Bungie trying to reconcile Reach's new philosophy with Halo's competitive roots. And this is where the fault lines begin to appear. Because Reach doesn't play like Halo 3. Armor abilities change engagements. Bloom introduces uncertainty. And Sprint alters map control. And suddenly, Halo players had to ask questions they'd never really had to before. Is mastery about precision or decision making? Is unpredictability depth or noise? Reach forced that conversation, and that's why it was so divisive. People were not just arguing about the mechanics. They were arguing about what Halo was at its core. So let's talk about Firefight 2.0, because this is where Reach quietly wins people over. You see, Firefight in ODST was a proof of concept, but Firefight in Halo Reach is a platform. Matchmaking, deep customization, skulls, lives, waves, objectives, all tunable. And for a lot of players, this became the home mode. Late nights, co-op suffering, legendary runs that turned into stories that people still tell to this day. Firefight doesn't ask you to dominate anyone. It asks you to survive together, which is maybe the most Reach thing possible. So let's run it back and talk about armor abilities. Sprint, jetpack, armor lock, active camo, hologram, evade, drop shield. These weren't just tools. They were philosophies. Every single ability changed how you approached danger. Sprint lets you disengage at a cost. The jetpack gave you vertical freedom and painted a huge fucking target on your back. Armor lock bought time, but froze you in place. And here's the thing people tend to forget. Bungie wanted players to think before committing to a firefight. They wanted that hesitation. They wanted fights to breathe. That doesn't mean every choice landed, no, but it does mean every choice had intent. And then there's Bloom. And we're not relegating it, but we do need to acknowledge it. Bloom wasn't random for randomness' sake. It was Bungie trying to reintroduce pacing and restraint into the firefights. Sometimes, yes, it worked. Sometimes, yes, it felt awful. Both things, yes, they can be true. But what matters is this. Reach didn't accidentally fracture the community. It challenged it. And games that challenge their core audience rarely come out unscarred, which is why something interesting happened much later. Because years after launch, when Reach returned in the Master Chief Collection, a lot of the anger had burned out. People weren't logging in to argue anymore. They were logging in to remember, to revisit modes they bounced off of at the time, and to appreciate things they didn't have patience for before. Time had changed the conversation. And that tells you something incredibly important. Reach's multiplayer wasn't built to please everyone forever. It was built to reflect the game it belonged to. Messy, deliberate, and completely human. And after all that debate, all that tension, Reach hands the keys to the players, and what they did with them was absolutely beautiful and ridiculous and saved our sanity. Forge in earlier Halo games was powerful, sure, but Forge World? Forge World was Bungie saying, here, take the whole damn sandbox, kid. One map, massive, seamless, deserts, canyons, cliffs, floating structures. No loading screens and no artificial walls. Just space. And Reach didn't just give us more room, it gave us better tools. And this is where pure magic happens. If you were around back then, you know these three words changed everything. Normal. Objects behave like physics objects. Fixed. Locked in place, no movement. Phased. Ignore collision entirely. That one setting alone unlocked an entire generation of creativity. Suddenly, you weren't fighting gravity, you weren't fighting the engine. You could stack shit, float platforms, build structures that would have been impossible before. Add in rotation snap, coordinated nudge, team coloring, object budgets that actually felt generous, and Forge stopped being a novelty, and it became a language all on its own. And what did the community do with all that power? Absolute nonsense, duh. Beautiful, glorious, unhinged nonsense. A full-on Halo version of NASCAR, and for the uneducated, it was essentially a never-ending ramp where you just kept going down it through a portal. You start at the beginning, keep going, and just gaining more and more momentum while one poor sap tries to either hit you with a grav hammer or hit you with a plasma grenade. And you haven't lived until you've seen a Wraith break the sound barrier and go whizzing by like a goddamn frisbee. We also made Jenga. Towered blocks stacked high in the sky, physics just waiting to betray you. One wrong hit from a launched warthog, and the whole thing would just collapse right from underneath you, while everyone screams in party chat. We made infection maps that felt like real horror movies. There was trash compactor, maze maps, pitch black rooms with glowing swords. We made game modes Bungie never planned for. We brought Duck Hunt back, Fat Kids, Speed Halo, Griff Ball variants, puzzles that took hours to solve and 5 minutes to break completely. Forge World was not just a tool set. It was a whole playground. And there's an important part. Forge World didn't exist separate from Reach's identity. It was a response to it. You see, Reach is heavy. And Forge is where we processed it. We laughed, we broke things, we stayed up way too late trying to just fix one more piece. Forge nights weren't competitive. They were communal. You were never there to win. You were there because everyone else was there too. And let's be honest, every Forge lobby had that one guy, the one trying to build something serious, and another dude spawning 40 fusion coils and just completely crashing the entire game while everything erupted around him. And you know what? Both of them were right. Forge World did something quietly revolutionary. It turned players into designers. People learned about map flow, sight lines, spawn logic. They learned what worked by breaking it. And years later, when games started pushing creator modes, community tools, and UGC pipelines, Reach was already there. And that's why Forge World matters. Not because of any single map, but because it kept Reach alive. Long after the campaign ended, and long after arguments had cooled down. Forge made Reach a place you return to, which brings me to something kind of important. Reach didn't just live in the custom games. It came back years later on new hardware with all of its baggage in tow and all of those memories. And the way it landed the second time around, that's kind of worth talking about. The weird thing about Halo Reach is it never softened with time. It sharpened. When Reach came back as part of the Master Chief Collection, first on Xbox, then on PC in 2019, it wasn't arriving as the new Halo. It was arriving as a cherished memory. You weren't booting it up to see what Bungie had done this time. You were booting it up knowing exactly what it was going to take from you. And that changes the experience when you look at it that way. Back in 2010, a lot of the conversation around Reach was noise. Arguments about the bloom mechanic, armor lock discourse, is this real Halo? Stuff like that. But when Reach returned, most of that had been long forgotten about. People weren't logging in to litigate mechanics anymore. They were logging in to revisit a place, to hear that music again, to walk those same roads, to stand on that last hill one more time. And Reach, to its credit, did not try to modernize itself emotionally. It just waited. Reach in the MCC runs cleaner. The visuals are sharper. The frames are smoother. But the tone? Untouched. The skies are still oppressive. The missions still end the way they always did. Lone Wolf still refuses to let you win. And that's why Reach hits harder now. Because now you're not discovering the tragedy, you're choosing to walk back into it. And that choice, it matters. Because when you return to Reach as an adult with more miles on you, more losses behind you, the story stops being abstract and it starts feeling a little familiar. You recognize the feeling of plans unraveling, of doing everything right and still falling short, of showing up anyways. Reach doesn't feel like a video game tragedy anymore. It feels almost like a truth. And that's why Reach stands apart in Bungie's catalog, at least for me. Combat Evolved was awakening. Halo 2 was upheaval. Halo 3 was closure. Reach? That was reflection. It was Bungie looking back at everything they'd built and saying, this mattered, even if it didn't last. And now we're here, at the end of the Bungie's Halo era. And not with a bang, but with a quiet, which feels perfect. Bungie didn't just end with tragedy, they ended with both. Reach is heartbreak, yes, a requiem where you watch heroes fall, a planet burn, and a story that tells you from the very first frame you are not going to win. It's Spartans erased one by one, the music fading into silence, the ghosts of Noble Team haunting every mission they're not a part of. But Reach is also triumph. It's Bungie proving one more time that they could bend mechanics, story, music, and myth into something completely unforgettable. That they could make a shooter feel like memory. That they could wring poetry out of jetpacks and bloom mechanics. That they could build an ending where you don't cheer. You sit there in the quiet, staring into the dust where a Spartan once stood. And yes, this episode probably feels more somber than the other Halo deep dives. And that's not by accident. Because Reach, like I said, it's not about nostalgia fireworks. It's about endurance. Like I said earlier, it gave me some of my proudest moments in all of gaming. And it had nothing to do with leaderboards. And it had nothing to do with bragging to my friends. Running that campaign solo on Legendary to earn a monument to all your sins, standing there at the end knowing the game didn't bend, I had to. Pulling off if they came to hear me beg. One perfect moment of execution in the middle of absolute chaos. Those didn't feel like achievements. They felt like proof. Proof that Reach didn't just want you to survive. It wanted you to endure. When I boot up Reach nowadays, I don't feel like I'm playing to win. Although I'm absolutely playing to win if you get me on SWAT. But I feel like I'm retracing a last living memory. Stepping into the boots of a Spartan already long gone. And somehow, that makes it hit harder than anything else Bungie ever made. From the beginning, you knew the end, but it still broke your heart to live it. And that's the real triumph. Bungie made us feel. Halo began with a lone soldier waking from cryosleep, and it ended with a lone soldier dying in the dust. Tragedy, yes, but also a perfect circle. And that's Halo Reach. And that's going to do it for this episode of the Average Joe Nerdcast. If you stuck with me all the way through this one, seriously, thank you. Reach is a heavy game. And yes, I did cover it a little more somberly. But it felt important to close the Bungie era the right way. I've said it before, and I'll say it again here at the end. This show exists because of moments just like these, because of the games that stayed with us long after the credits rolled. And Reach will always have a special place in my heart. When I boot it up, it takes me back to a period of my life that I look back on with nothing but fondness. So if Reach meant something to you too, if you remember your lone wolf last stand, your forge nights, your legendary runs, or that one moment you absolutely should not have survived, tell me all about it. Hit me up on socials, drop a comment, shoot me a message, send an email, carrier pigeon, message in a bottle, scream into the void. Tell me your Reach story. And if you enjoyed this episode, the best way you can help support the show is the boring but important stuff. Please follow the podcast and leave a 5-star rating or review. And share the episode with a friend who still knows exactly where Noble Team fell. That stuff genuinely helps more than you know. Let's roll those shout-outs. Shout out to my player 2. Thank you for always listening to me ramble and never once telling me to shut up when I get too excited about Space Marines. Shout out to Cap. Thanks for being the dude who keeps pushing me to always hit record. And shout out to my brother Ian, always holding the fort down and always down to be my wingman to run through the tragedy that is Halo Reach. And shout out to Pickle. I don't fucking know why. And to you, everyone listening, whether you've been here since the Halo Combat Evolved deep dive or you just jumped in somewhere along the way. Thank you, seriously, for letting me tell these stories. And don't forget, the lobby's always open. Stay gold, nerd bold, and yeah, remember Reach. I'll catch you on the next one.
Game over.